All right, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2025 Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan Guidelines Update Virtual Kickoff Workshop. It's a bit of a mouthful. Thank you for joining us today. And next slide, please. My name is Destiny Preston, and I work on the Commission's planning team and am the primary point of contact for this effort. Today on this webinar, we have other Commission staff members attending who I will briefly introduce now. Joining us today is Laura Pennybaker, Planning Deputy, Matthew Yascott, Senate Bill 1 Programming Deputy, and Naveen Habib, Program Manager for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. We look forward to diving more into today's content, but first we'd like to discuss webinar logistics. Next slide, please. Participants are strongly encouraged to use the interactive features to share their thoughts at any time during the workshop. If you plan to make a comment or ask a question, please clearly state your name and your organization's name. You may raise your hand or add a comment at any point during our presentation, and we will ensure all comments are addressed as received. If you have multiple questions, share them one at a time so that we may address each question in its entirety. And finally, as a reminder, your workshop registration link and phone number are unique to you. Please do not share this information with other participants as it duplicates the same attendee and creates confusion for commission staff. Any questions? All right, thank you. So today's workshop will begin with a brief overview of the 2018 CMCP guidelines that are being updated. We'll then present a high-level overview of proposed technical changes to the draft guidelines before sharing our proposed schedule for final adoption. At the end of today's workshop, we'll have dedicated time for stakeholders to ask questions and share feedback. We'll then recap the feedback received before summarizing action items and sharing future engagement opportunities. Next slide, please. All right, so as you may recall, following the passage of Senate Bill 1, the Commission began the Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan Guidelines development process in July 2018 and adopted the final CMCP guidelines in December 2018. Streets and Highways Code, Section 2391, requires that the Solutions for Congested Corridors funding shall be available for projects that make specific performance improvements and are part of a comprehensive corridor plan designed to reduce congestion in highly traveled corridors by providing more transportation choices for residents, commuters, and visitors to the area of the corridor, while preserving the character of the local community and creating opportunities for neighborhood enhancement projects. The Commission developed the Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan Guidelines to provide guidance to eligible program applicants regarding the statutory requirements for comprehensive corridor plans utilized by agencies to apply for funding through the Congested Corridors program. The guidelines cover roles and responsibilities for the preparation and review of plans. The guidelines also focus on identifying plan content pursuant to statutory requirements, public outreach and engagement, as well as sharing planning resources. Next slide, please. Since 2018, the statewide transportation policy landscape has evolved. And so in order to ensure that the guidelines reflect the most up-to-date information regarding comprehensive multimodal corridor planning practice, we are proposing changes to the existing guidelines that focus on making the guidelines more streamlined and clear, as well as updating policy and technical references. So the overall sections have been combined and rearranged within the guidelines to improve flow, resulting in a more streamlined document. We've also updated the guidelines to reflect the latest Caltrans corridor planning guidance documents. We've created a new planning resources appendix to support CMCP development. We've included references to the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, known as CAPTI, which contains policies pertaining to discretionary funding programs, including the Commission's Solutions for Congested Corridors program. CAPTI was originally released in 2021 and was updated in February 2025 to further promote strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled. This update is known as CAPTI 2.0, and it includes action 7 or S2.4, which calls for the Solutions for Congested Corridor program guidelines to target a vehicle miles traveled neutral suite of investments, starting with the 5th cycle, 2026, of the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. This strategy will be achieved by continuing the Commission's existing practice within the program guidelines to further prioritize projects for funding that reduce vehicle miles traveled. Next slide, please. Now I'll discuss the steps in the public process for rolling out the draft CMCP guidelines. Next slide, please. CTC staff are now finalizing the initial draft 2025 CMCP guidelines for public review. We'll provide informational updates on the process and timeline at the June CTC meeting in Sacramento. We anticipate the draft to be released in July for a 30-day comment period. At the August CTC meeting, we will provide another informational update and share feedback received during the comment period. The final draft document will be presented informationally at the October CTC meeting, and we anticipate final adoption at the December CTC meeting. And with that, we can now transition to our dedicated time for questions and comments. Next slide, please. And we welcome your feedback on the proposed update. So please feel free to share your questions and comments now. And you can also separately contact me to share your thoughts at any time. So I'll pause now for feedback.
Hey, Destiny, there's a question in the comments, and it is: draft guidelines commenting is open to public or internal only?
Yeah, so when the guidelines are released, that'll be for public review during that 30-day comment period.
There's another question also from Sandra Vasquez. How are internal agencies providing feedback if it is only open to the public?
Yeah, so we have done some coordination with regional agencies and Caltrans leading up to the release of the draft. If you would like to weigh in at that stage, feel free to reach out to me to share your thoughts, questions, or concerns, and we can organize a time to discuss that.
Hey, Destiny, this is Laura Pitty Baker, and actually I have a question for Sandra. I guess my question is, what agencies are you referring to when you say internal agencies? because these guidelines are a commission document that we prepare in close partnership with Caltrans. Okay, state agencies. So yes, so we've done a bit of coordination ahead of time with Caltrans as our main partner. So I think the correct way to phrase feedback we're getting at this point is from any interested state agencies that we haven't already reached out to, as well as the general public. Hopefully that answered the question. Got it. Okay.
Thanks, Laura.
There's a question from Dustin Foster. Which regional agencies have you spoken to thus far?
Yeah, so we have coordinated with regional agencies in Santa Cruz, San Bernardino, LA Metro, and in Santa Barbara, just as we got started. But we expect that there will be continuing coordination with regional agencies across the state.
Destiny, I think that covers all of the questions we currently have written in the Q&A. I will also remind any of our participants, you're more than welcome to raise your hand if you have a question, or you can drop it in the Q&A function as we've had. But I do ask, if you do submit a question, can you please identify what organization you represent? Even though we can see your name, we cannot see the affiliation. So that would just help in terms of how we provide responses. But with that, Destiny, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. I will pause for another minute or so to see if there are any other questions or comments. All right, seeing no other comments or questions, thank you for joining us today and for participating. And please stay.
Destiny, there is a question from
Okay.
Louis Zhao from OCTA. Is there a list of Caltrans guidance that the commission plans to incorporate into the CMCP guidelines?
Yeah, at this time, it's focused on the Caltrans corridor planning guidance. So that is included by reference, as well as the emphasis area guides that have already been published. And we also reference emphasis area guides that we know are currently being developed. So hopefully that answers the question.
Maybe we can, thank you, Louis. Maybe we can stay on the line for just like 5 or 10 more minutes since this was scheduled for 2 hours. In
Sure.
case anybody else has any questions.
That sounds good.
Destiny, there's a question. Douglas Keene, VTA, would you mind writing that last answer in the chat or repeating?
Yes. So in terms of the question of what I believe, if I'm restating this correctly, what Caltrans guidance is mentioned or incorporated into the guidelines. And so there are references to Caltrans corridor planning guidance, as well as the emphasis area guides that have already been published, and emphasis area guides that we know are currently in development. And we continue to work closely with Caltrans to ensure that this reflects the best available guidance that they have produced.
We have a couple more questions. I will take them in the order they were received. Aaron Hoyt from Nevada County Transportation. Will all of the CAPDI 2.0 strategies be included in the update? And how will applicants be required to demonstrate consistency?
Yeah, so there is a reference to the CAPDI 2.0 strategy related to the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, but we see that as more connected to those program guidelines, not specifically the CMCP guidelines. And Matthew, I don't know if you want to jump in to expand on that.
Yeah, Destiny, I'm happy to. I think you pretty much covered it. So obviously the CMCP guidelines are very specific to the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. And the CAPTI 2.0 document did, you could say, update the original CAPTI document from back in 2021, but it did have very specific actions. And particularly for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, I believe Destiny highlighted that particular action. It was around targeting a VMT neutral program in the Solutions program of projects, which would be cycle 5. So as I understand it, we're only considering that particular action when we're talking about updating the CMCP guidelines with this current round.
Thanks, Matthew. I think that answered Aaron's question, so he's good. I will go on to the next question that was received. It's by Rachel from SCAG. Curious if there are specific topics or questions you anticipated from the group today, as the guidelines are not yet available and we had 2 hours scheduled for the workshop.
Yeah, so in our coordination so far, we have just wanted to understand the landscape of CMCPs across the state and plans potentially to apply for cycle 5 funding to make sure that we consider that in the timeline for a rollout. So at this stage, it's more of a kickoff workshop. We have, like I said, the guidelines will be released in July for a 30-day comment period, and then there'll be informational updates at future CTC meetings. And we're also happy to schedule another workshop as needed if there's interest in that.
Thank you, Destiny. I wanted to just chime in as well. It's a great question, Rachel. And I think if I wanted to really guide folks towards what we need from you all, and I think what we wanted to convey today is just, these are the main topics that we think the guidelines would benefit from an update in. I think helping to understand if there are any timing issues or concerns from an implementation standpoint as you think about updating your guidelines or your plans, excuse me. And then also, I think we're open to any feedback about how these guidelines could be more user friendly. So I recognize that there's not a draft out there, but this is also the space for people to tell us what wasn't helpful about the original version of the guidelines, just to be perfectly candid. And then Steve did just want to acknowledge your request for a future workshop, and that is definitely something that staff, wants to make sure that we can offer to have more dialogue once the draft is out.
Thanks, Laura.
One more question for you, Destiny. Well, a couple more questions for you. I'll go in order. Dustin Foster had a follow-up. Thank you. This is Dustin Foster at SACOG. Matthew noted the CAPDI strategy calling for a VMT neutral program. Is that a requirement for each submittal or award, or in total?
I mean, I'm happy to answer that. And I should probably introduce myself since I think Destiny did. Thanks for the question, Dustin. This is Matthew Yozgut. I'm the deputy for SB1 programming. So realistically, the CAPTI target for VMT neutrality as written is calling for the program, which if you're familiar with SCCP, you know we're upon our fourth cycle, which we'll be recommending to commissioners for approval this June. And what that program will include is a suite of projects that competed for just under $500 million in SCCP funding. So using that example, the CAPTI strategy for SCCP from CAPTI 2.0, and I've worked very closely with Darwin Musavi and CalSTA on this. The idea is that for cycle 5, the commission will target a VMT neutral suite of projects, which would be, if you took the cycle 4 example that I just provided you, you would look at a $500 million suite of projects, and that the VMT neutrality would be a result when you consider all of those projects. So your question is a little specific. It asks, are we talking about projects themselves, or are we talking about plans themselves? No, the answer is projects do not need to be deemed VMT neutral per se when they're submitted for cycle 4 or cycle 5 consideration, but it's the CAPTI strategy is asking the commission to consider that when we program roughly $500 million in cycle 5, that when you consider all of those projects together, it equates to VMT neutral. I do know that CalSTA contracted with MTI to do an assessment after the first CAPTI was published back in 2021. And that assessment did get into VMT metrics based on, I believe that would have been cycle 2 SCCP or cycle 3 SCCP. I'll correct myself, cycle 3. So that's how we're treating this CAPTI strategy. But in terms of how that gets fleshed out to the program, I'm going to offer this group this particular workshop and this particular set of guidelines that we're discussing this afternoon is very specific to the comprehensive multimodal corridor plans. So Naveen and I, Naveen being the program manager, we will be considering the CAPTI 2.0 language with VMT neutrality in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program guidelines. So I know maybe that's a little confusing. I see we have a lot of planners on the call who are, I'm guessing, are responsible for the plans themselves, but we will flesh out the CAPTI 2.0 language within the program guidelines, and that's a process Naveen will roll out this upcoming, likely mid to late fall, and that will be also with involvement from CalSTA and our stakeholders. So I want to make it very clear that we're talking about CAPTI 2.0 in the CMCP guidelines process, but the real change in policy will come through the program guidelines themselves. And that's, I mean, I don't want to say that's a separate set of guidelines, but it is.
I will, Dustin said, thanks, that is helpful. Great. I will move on to the next question. This is from Louis Zhao from OCTA. How will the new guidance impact the existing CMCPs? Will agencies be required to update existing CMCPs to meet specific requirements in the new CMCP?
Thank you for the question, Louis. I can take a stab at answering it for you. So I will say this, once these guidelines are updated and adopted, it is expected that any CMCP that is utilized for a project application in cycle 5 of the Congested Corridors program will be consistent with these guidelines. Now, whether or not that necessitates an update to an existing CMP will be a bit of a case-by-case situation. We as staff do not believe that anything in these, like the updates that we plan on undertaking, would immediately require a CMCP to be updated, but we would absolutely want to understand if you all as practitioners feel differently. And I would just sort of reiterate the idea that a CMCP having a shelf life of approximately 5 years, and your updates being important to make sure that the plans are based on like the most like current information. That is more of what we believe is the impetus for updating your plan. So I guess it's case by case, but we don't believe that it will immediately require an update. You just have to make sure that it's consistent.
Okay, I will move on to the next question. This is from Jake Buffenbarger, Caltrans D4. At the CMCP level, projects are usually early on in the development process, and we usually would not have enough project level data to determine VMT impacts. Is that being considered?
That's a great. Okay,
so
thanks, Laura.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand the exact nuance of this question. So at the CMCP level, projects are usually early on, and there might not be enough project level data to determine VMT impacts. I would say that yes, that is considered in how these guidelines, I guess, guide plans, corridor plans in that area. I think if anyone in practice feels like there's an expectation that's different than that, staff would certainly want to be made aware of that. But I think we are trying to acknowledge that there's a certain level of detail available about project concepts, and the potential solutions that are being identified in a corridor plan. So I think that's our answer to that question. And we definitely want to know if anyone felt differently as they were using the guidelines or preparing their plans.
And I'll just briefly add that the self-certification form that's contained within the Solutions for Congested Corridor Programs guidelines that was approved during the last cycle, that's still the frame of reference, at this time for the 2025 CMCP guidelines. So you can continue to reference that to understand how you can consider and address VMT impacts.
And Destiny, just only because you mentioned the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, and I know we may have members of our audience that are not always attending the program guideline workshops, but I do want to make it clear that vehicle miles traveled is a performance metric that is required when projects are submitted. So I understand a project application comes after the stage of the CMCP, but I do want to make it clear VMT is a required metric to be reported on when projects are submitted for Solutions for Congested Corridors program evaluation. So just wanting to make sure we're understanding that it is a requirement, but at the application stage.
There are no pending questions at this time.
I would also add that as the person who's supposed to be noticing if anyone has raised their hand to speak, I have not noticed any raised hands. If someone has been trying to speak, please denote that in the chat.
Maybe people are shy, Laura.
Oh, I think we're very early on in this process, and so I think it's understandable that people are still formulating some thoughts and opinions, which is why both Destiny and I will be very available for any and all follow-up questions, in particular, after folks have maybe had a chance to digest a bit more what we've talked about today.
I feel like we always remind folks during the program guidelines development workshops, this is for you. This is your moment to shine in the sun, to complain about things, to ask questions about things. It's a good time. And like Laura said, you can always follow up with them independently, but chances are if you have a question, somebody else has the exact same question, maybe 15 other someone. So don't be shy, ask questions.
Yeah, and we'll stay on a little bit, so you can, it looks like a question just came in, but as a reminder too, you can separately contact me to share your thoughts at any time.
To answer the question that just popped up in the chat, absolutely yes. The draft that goes out for public comment will denote where changes have been made, so you all can see the edits that have been made in the document.
All right, maybe we can wait another minute or so. See if there's any other feedback. All right, seeing no other feedback, I appreciate everyone that was able to attend today, and thank you for sharing your questions and comments, and as well as the suggestion that we hold another workshop, which we're had already anticipated would occur. So that will be another opportunity to ask additional questions and share your thoughts on the draft 2025 CMCP guidelines. And so we'll work on deciding on a date for this next workshop. And then other than that, please stay tuned for the email announcement in July once the guidelines are open for public review. Next slide, please. All right, so thank you to everyone who joined today's kickoff workshop, and we look forward to working with the public and our agency partners on the CMCP guidelines update. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions or comments. Thank you. All right, see you soon.
All right, ending the recording. See you all later.